A tribute to Michael Avallone, writer. Hi, I'm Gary Lovisi, and this time I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to talk about my friend Mike Avallone. When I was a young guy and I wanted to be a writer, being Italian-American and Sicilian-American, there were no writers that I used to read that were Italian. This is way before Mario Puzo. This is way before Francis Ford Coppola was making his movies, and Tarantino and people like that. When I was growing up in the 60s, there were no Italian writers. There were black writers, African-American writers. There were many others that I read, and I had their books, and I collected them, and I loved them. But I said, there's no Italian writers. I said, there was one guy who wrote some science fiction, Thomas F. Monteleone, which I believe was Italian. But I wasn't really into his science fiction. I didn't know it that well. And there was one other guy who wrote Private Eye stories and all kinds of other stuff. And the Man from U.N.C.L.E. book, which I bought brand new when the TV show came out, and you know, when that book came out in around 1964 or 66, and that was Mike Avallone, Avo for short. Mike was a character. He was a raconteur. He was a talkative guy. He loved the ladies. He could be so charming, it was unbelievable. He loved his fans, and his fans loved him. He was a good guy. He was a nice guy. He was, again, a character who sometimes, in some cases, we become our worst enemies sometimes when we take things too personally, or we get hurt by words or critics that say certain things. And that's in a way how I became friends with Mike, because when I was publishing Paperback Parade, in the first or second issue, there was a interview that Will Murray did with Lyle Kenyon Engel, who was the book promoter, Book Creations, and did many books. He would basically get the contracts for series and then hire the authors to write the books. A lot of them were movie tie-ins, TV tie-ins of popular shows, and he hired Mike and had Mike doing the quite a few of these books, along with many other famous authors and from all genres. And I ran this article in Paperback Parade where Will Murray, who's a great guy and a very knowledgeable about pulps and writing, was a little maybe too critical of Mike, and also Lyle Kenyon Engel said some things like Mike's writing was maybe too fast, it wasn't that good, or maybe he didn't edit himself as well as he should have, or whatever. There's always, you know, writing is very subjective, it's in the eye of the beholder. So the thing is that Mike wrote me, and he was like very upset by that. And I could see that, I could see behind his words of what he said. And I could see that he was hurt. And, you know, I got in touch with him, and I told him, I says, like, you know, it's wasn't meant to insult you or anything. It was meant, you know, just trying to Paperback Parade do the history of paperbacks and authors and artists and writers and all these things. And we became friends after that. And he did some articles for me for Paperback Parade and for other things. Let me reprint some of his things, his Ed Noon books and some other things. So I'm just going to show you some things that.
Well, didn't you tell me you gave him an opportunity to set the record straight? Or
yes, I'm just going to get to that, but I just want to get to. I did give him the opportunity to get the record straight, but I'm just going to, before I get to all of that, I'm just going to start off a little bit about Mike, because he was Mike was one of 17 children, and he was in World War II. He was a tank commander in Patton's tank corps in the Third Army, and he fought in the Battle of the Bulge. And he was, he told me this many times, he says, like, you know, with the dropping of the atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, he's in August of 1945, that ended the war with Japan. He said that he was, and his tank and his tank crew were at the European port, ready to go onto a ship to go to Japan for the invasion of Japan, and that he was going to be involved in that fighting, which they figured would cost 1 million American lives. But that's where he was. He was a tank commander. He was a soldier, and then he came back from the war, and did some writing. And wanted to write the great American novel, and like so many people, it didn't work out. But he did write a great novel by an American, and his first Ed Noon book in 1951 was The Tall Dolores, and that was the first of probably, I think about, I'm not sure, 30 or 40 books in the Ed Noon series that he wrote over a 40-year period. And The Tall Dolores, here's Mike. Here's a picture of Mike, young Mike, good-looking, handsome woman killer. And this is from 1953. And he owned the artwork for The Tall Dolores. That's the painting by Schwartz, which was on the Perma paperback reprint of The Tall Dolores, the first Ed Noon book. And that was basically his first book, although he wrote a lot of paperback originals for movies and TV tie-ins later on. He wrote for the pulps, a lot of pulp stories, and he's a great guy. And so what happened with that story that I was talking about in Paperback Parade is also that in the third issue, I asked Frank Hamilton, contributed a cover for Paperback Parade number 3. This is back in 1986. And Mike Avallone dressed as Sherlock Holmes. Frank Hamilton did the cover art. Mike Avallone dressed as Sherlock Holmes, and Ed Noon, Tall Dolores, and this is based on the painting that was in Mike's office. Mike lived in New Jersey at 80 Hilltop, and in the house there was his writing studio, which was the Mouse Auditorium. The Mouse Auditorium was like Ed Noon's headquarters. Ed Noon is, I asked Mike in an interview that I did with him in 1994, how much of Ed Noon is you? He says, he told me that 100%. He says, except you know, Ed Noon's handsomer, Ed Noon's younger, Ed Noon's stronger, Ed Noon's smarter, blah 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 blah, and you know, so Mike was Ed Noon, and he put all himself into the Ed Noon stories. There, some wild, wacky, crazy stuff happens in all of those. They're hard-boiled, private eye novels, but with a kind of a wacky twist to a lot of them. Francis Nevins Jr., a famous critic in the mystery field, called it the Nooniverse, because it's like this almost, Mike had Ed Noon's universe was like a universe by itself. It's its own laws and physics and reality. But the Mouse Auditorium, Mickey Mouse, another favorite of Mike's, was his private domain in the house, where he had all his books, and he had all of his little gotchas and tchotchkes and little statues and all kinds of things that he had there. It was quite an interesting place to be. When I was first met him and I first went out there with, by the way, other writers, Chris C.J. Henderson, we went, and a couple other guys. I believe Wayne Dundee. A few different writers. We went to visit Mike, and it was like we were all young guys starting out, and you know, we're going to kick the ass of the world with our great hard-boiled stories and stuff. But and we were seeing Mike, who was like 20, 30 years older than us, who'd been around. I mean, he was a contemporary of Mickey Spillane. He was writing when Mickey Spillane was writing, when Ross MacDonald was writing. He was writing when Chandler and Hammett was still around. And so he was very, very in the know with everybody, especially Mystery Writers of America and all of the people that were writing mystery and private eye and crime fiction in the 40s, in the late 40s, and especially in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and in the 80s. So much that I want to say about him. He was self-styled the fastest typewriter in the East. That's on the cover over here. Frank put that in, fastest typewriter in the East, because he did write fast. He could be very good, but sometimes he was okay. And the thing is, he wrote a lot of stuff, and he was a writer who was writing to pay the bills. He was not some trustee or some rich son of a rich person who had a lot of money and could just dilly-dally his life away writing novels and writing, stuff. No, he was a guy with a wife, children, family. He had to earn, he had to write to earn, to make money, to put food on the table, and he did that. And he wrote. He always told me one time, he says, a writer should be able to write anything from the Bible to a seed catalog. Whatever it is, he says, you should be able to write anything. And he wrote anything. He also wrote, in the 60s, sleaze novels, or what you'd call softcore adult novels that today are very campy and kind of almost silly. But they're collected because of their campiness and because of the cover art, but also because of just the stories. He wrote those, and he was proud of them. While he would say, like, while a lot of authors were also writing, and some quite famous ones, who I'll not mention, but they were writing sleaze books in the 60s. And these books, again, they were all innuendo. There was nothing explicit or X-rated about any of this material. It was just kind of campy and a little risque, but that's about it. But there were many writers that were writing this, and they all wrote it under pseudonyms or house names, and many of the writers, even to this day, there's some that will not admit what they wrote, and some, after many years, finally admit that, yes, I did write this book or that book, and that's fine. That's fine. But Mike was different. Mike had his name on the books. He wanted his name on the books, and he told me, he says, I was proud of everything that I wrote, he said, and that's the way it should be, I think. He was always proud of everything that he wrote. There's a lot to say about Mike. If he was here, he would say it all himself, because he was not shy at all. He was Mike Avallone was the greatest promoter of Mike Avallone. But people loved him. The fans loved him. Other writers, he would get in feuds with other writers. But the interesting thing is that I know that a lot of writers have feuds with other writers. So there's always this competition and stuff that goes on. But with the fans, he could charm the fans, and they loved him. And he would sign anything for anybody. And he was at many shows. He was always, if you did a pulp show or a paperback or a book show, Mike would be very happy, very proud to be a guest at the show. And he was a guest at my show when I started my New York City Pulp and Paperback Expo in 1989 that ran 25 years. I had Mike as a guest probably 15 years until he moved to California. And then he became a guest for 5 years at Tom Lesser's show. Mike loved the pulps. He loved Gary Cooper, all the classic movies of the black and white era of the 30s, 40s, and 50s, all the great books that were made into movies, like The Thin Man, Casablanca, The Maltese Falcon, all of that, and G8 and his Battle Aces, The Spider, The Shadow, Doc Savage. He loved all of it, and he knew all of it. And so Mike would always, he'd always be at these shows, PulpCon, my show, many other, BoucherCon, and many other shows. And he would always sign for anybody. There's a little joke going around at that time that if you had, Mike would sign the book, and you'd have a rare signed, Mike Avallone book, which is really cool to have. And some people would say, yeah, I wish I had the rare unsigned Mike Avallone, because everything was signed by him. That he would sign everything and anything. And it was pretty cool though. He was a good guy. We had a lot of fun, and he was fun to be with and to be around. Here's a picture of Mike at the first. I'm going to move this out of the way. Mike and Mitchell Hooks at my first New York City Paperback Expo. They were the two guests of honor. That was in 1989. And here's a picture of Mike in 1988 at BoucherCon. I believe that was in Philadelphia. So Mike got around, and I love this picture of him, 1953. And he's a good guy. There's so much to say about him. I mean, I did an interview with him in the Australian magazine Mean Streets, number 12 in 1994, and it's just, we talked about a whole lot of stuff. We talked about his writing. This is a Frank Hamilton illustration that talks about Mike and all of the different characters that he read and enjoyed and liked. He was a fountain of information. It's another young picture of Mike as a young guy. He's a good-looking guy. He was quite the raconteur, quite the talker, very articulate, very like to gab. I'm going to show you that later. And this was one of his books, Ed Noon books, The Dead Game, and The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which he started that series, the first book. And it's interesting. I mean, this is from Mike. This is his typed out responses to my questions for the interview that I did with him. And it just has it signed by him from 1993, and just a letter from him in his usual style of writing, just that he says, I gave you some good stuff here for the interview, and I hope you enjoy it. And so that was for Mean Streets. I eventually reprinted two of his books as I was doing the Greif and Double series of like the Ace books, only these were like trade digest sized paperbacks. One was Open Season on Cops. This is Greif and Double number 4, and Frank Hamilton did the illustrations on both of them. And this was like the classic Ace doubles, where you have one book. In this case, it's a short novel on one side, and then on the other side was the Arabella Nude. And the thing about this was that, which I was not aware of at the time, Frank Hamilton pulled kind of a fast one on me. Mike was upset with Will about the article, and he felt that he was slapped and unfairly. And Frank Hamilton did the artwork for the Arabella Nude, Nick Carter's Revenge, and Ed Noon slapping a guy who looks a little bit like Will Murray. So I didn't know at the time that they pulled this kind of stunt on me, but that Frank had pulled the stunt on me. But I was a little not too happy about it, but I didn't know about that. But that's something that's from the old days, that you know, the way things happen. The other thing I want to say is that Mike wrote a bunch of great books. Some of the talked about some of the Ed Noon books. The Bedroom Bolero, which I have read recently, is a really good book, very good private eye novel. And the Voodoo Murders, which is a gold medal book with Mitchell Hook's cover art, which Mike liked. And Mike liked the cover for this too, for the Bedroom Bolero. It's a Belmont book. Mike became, I guess, some of his most famous books were the Midwood books that he wrote, the 60s Sleaze books, published by Midwood Books, which is actually named after the Midwood section of Brooklyn, where the publishers lived. And one of them was the Little Black Book, and this has a Raider cover, Women in Prison, and with another Raider cover, the Platinum Trap. These are all 60s softcore sleaze books, all with Mike's name on them. He was always proud of everything that he wrote. And the thing is, with these, Mike was writing books for Midwood, and then they stopped. Either they had some kind of a problem with the. There was some reason why he had another book that he had sold called Mitzi, and he had been paid for it, and it wasn't published. For some reason, Midwood had some kind of a problem with the printer or something. There was some reason where the book didn't come out. He was paid for it. He then sold it to Curtis Books, and the book didn't come out again. And then finally it came out when I did it as a crime novel #2 in 1997 in a dust-jacketed trade paperback. Ron Turner did the cover art. This is like the Lorena Bobbitt kind of story, but it was written in the early 60s, way before, decades before the Lorena Bobbitt incident. But this is basically that novel. And the interesting thing is, this is one of the editions that's signed, and it has a signature sheet by with Mike's signature on it. Also Ron Turner, who did the cover art, and Wayne Dundee, who wrote an introduction to the book. And this is a dust-jacketed paperback, which I was publishing then. One of the big book, I think, that Mike wrote, and a bone of contention with him for probably many years, was the first book in the Man from U.N.C.L.E. series. He wrote that, which was a TV tie-in for the Man from U.N.C.L.E., which ran, I think, about 24 books, and this book sold like crazy, and he always complained that he never got paid for the reprints on it. They told him that they printed the initial printing, and that didn't sell very well, and then it didn't sell very well, but they published another 23 books in the series, and because Ace probably didn't want to they just didn't want to pay him, because they did it. It was all work for hire, and probably in those days, the way the contracts ran, work for hire, you got a flat check, and that was it. But he always said, like, this book, started the series of the Man from U.N.C.L.E., and this is from 1965. and you know, very popular TV show. But these books were good. I bought this book, not this particular one, but this book when it first came out in 1965 when I was a kid, and I read it and I loved it, and I loved that series in the show. That was a must-see TV show when I was a kid, like 13 years old back then. Mike wrote a lot of stuff. He wrote a lot of things under pseudonym. He wrote Krakatoa East of Java. He wrote many movies, novelizations, and all kinds of things. There's so many. If I was to have all of those books, I'd have piles here. You wouldn't even be able to see me. They'd be covered in front of me because there'd be so many piles of books. But he did some interesting ones. The Coxman series, Coxeman, and these were sexy spy books, kind of risque, and they had great titles though. They were all published by Paperback Library. They were all Paperback originals. Number 27. They all had these risque kind of titles. The Penetrator. Number 7 is Last Licks. Number 23, The Masturbator, Baiter. Number 5, kind of play on the Beatles. It's getting harder all the time. Number 6, Come One, Come All. Number 18, Sex Machine. And these are all fun spy spoofs based on James Bond to a certain extent. And they were just fun books. Mike wrote a lot of stuff in various styles. The Coxman books were sexy spy spoofs, not to be taken seriously. He said it was just ridiculous, funny stuff. He said the Butcher books were another series that he wrote, which was really brutal, hard-boiled, nasty stuff, and those are very, very much collected, and people enjoy those because they're really hard-boiled. See, he wrote a lot of different stuff. He was an interesting guy. He's missed by a lot of people, and I just wanted to do this little tribute to him my own way. There's so many Avallone stories. I've told a couple, but I've probably forgotten 100 of them because there's just so much, you know. Ed Gorman used to call me up and he'd say, "I got a letter from Mike Avallone today. Gary," he says, "what am I going to do?" He says, "He's really angry with me." And Ed was a great guy. Ed was a guy who did he published Mystery Scene. He actually created Mystery Scene. I think he had a hand in creating the Private Eye Writers of America. And he was a famous novelist in his own right in the horror genre as David Ransom, and in the crime field, the private eye field. His Jack Dwyer books are great. They're great hard-boiled crime novels. Ed was a great guy. He was a guy who always gave people an opportunity. And he would say, "Mike, he's going off again. What am I going to do?" I said, "Don't worry. He's okay. It's all right. Don't worry." And he'd go, "Okay, yeah." And I says, "You know, Mike's upset. Yeah, but what's this blacklist? He always talks about the blacklist." And I asked Mike about that, and he says, "Yeah, 1975. They all said I was difficult to work with, and which I'm not, but he said that they had him on a blacklist." And I says, "Who's going to put, really? I mean, this was in the 1990s. I says, "I know about the blacklist of the 50s because of communism." Mike wasn't a communist. It wasn't anything like that. It was just that he was difficult sometimes he could be difficult to work with. And because he wanted to be paid. You know, a lot of publishers would say, "Yeah, we want a book by you, but we'll pay you." You know, it's like wimpy. You know, like I will gladly pay you Thursday for a hamburger today, you know? Same thing with Mike. Yeah, we want Mike to start off the series. We want it to be Man from U.N.C.L.E. #1. Mike Avallone is the author, well-known author, that we can have him do the book. And then they say, yeah, but we'll pay you, you know, we'll pay you later. We'll pay you later. Okay, well, hey, it's a week now. You haven't paid me. It's a month now. You haven't paid me. It's a year now. You haven't paid me. You know, and again, Mike was not any rich kid on an expense account or anything. He was a guy, came back from the war, fighting for his country, had a wife, had kids, and he needed to earn, and he needed to make money, and he was a writer, and so he needed to sell his work, his writing, and he wanted to be paid for it. And you know, a lot of publishers would play fast and loose in those days, and they do today too, you know. But you know, Mike was, you know, so he's telling me about this, you know, the blacklist, and I said, the blacklist, and I go, yeah. So I decided to investigate that, because as the editor of Paperback Parade, and as the editor of Hard Boiled magazine, and as a writer myself, I had a little bit of contact with a lot of people, and I would ask a lot of them, editors, publishers at New York publishing houses, some prestigious names, and some people that, you know, quite powerful in the mystery crime writing field. And I would ask them, you know, would you ever publish Mike Avallone? And they go, no, not at all. And I go, well, he thinks there's a blacklist against him. He goes, well, I wouldn't publish anything from him. And they told me that, more than one person. And I said, suppose you got a book by him and it was the best damn thing you ever got, and it knocked your socks off. Would you publish him? They said no. That was my fallback thing. I said, you got the best damn book from this guy that you ever saw, you know. Would you publish it? No. I go, then what's that about? So maybe Mike was right, you know. But the thing is with Mike, again, sometimes he could be his own worst enemy, and there's a lot of people like that. Where this video started, you know, he was a sensitive guy. He was a hard-boiled, tough guy who wrote these tough private eye stories of Ed Noon. But Ed Noon, if you really read the books, Ed Noon's like a pussycat. Ed Noon is a really nice guy. He's a sweetheart. And Mike was like that. And you know, when you're a sweetheart, you get hurt. You get hurt. People use you. People say things about you. And sometimes it's true, and sometimes it's not. But whatever it is, it hurts. And, you know, Mike was the kind of guy, he was a great guy. And it's just, you know, it was wonderful that I had him as a guest at my show for like about 15 years, and every year I would see him, and every year we would get together and have good times. And then he went out to Tom Lesser's show in LA, when he moved out there with his wife Fran to be near their children. And he spent the last, I guess, 5 or 6 years of his life in LA, or in the area of the West Coast, and he did Tom's show for 5 years or so. And when I went out to the show there, I would see him, and it was just like great just seeing him. Hey, Mike, I says, come on, when are you going to come back east? He goes, oh, I miss 80 Hilltop. I miss the Mouse Auditorium. I go, yeah, it's just like, it was really special, you know, being with him and being at his house and all. And you know, it's just like, I think about it, it's like with C.J. Henderson, you know, Chris Henderson, and Jesus, I mean, Charlie Hoffman. I think Wayne Dundee was with us, and there's a couple of people I can't remember, a couple of guys that don't come to mind right now. But I mean, it was like us all hanging out and shooting the breeze, and just, you know, complaining and talking about everything, and having great dreams and great stories, and every once in a while, maybe one or two of them came true, but the thing was that we were all together and we had a lot of fun and a lot of great times. And I just wanted to share this little memory of Mike with you. If you read his books, if you read the Ed Noon books, you'll like them. They're pretty good. They're pretty good. Not great, but they're pretty good. If you've he wrote a lot of other stuff that was fun, great stuff. Collectors like his stuff. They collect his stuff. If you ever met Mike at a show, he would gladly sign your book. He would sign every book that you brought him, and he would charm you and make you smile and make you feel like you're the most important person in that room. And that's a great quality. He had great charm, great, almost like an Irish kind of magic, you know, for an Italian. And that's when I started this off, because I said, like, when I was a kid, like when I was reading like the Man from U.N.C.L.E. book, 1965, the first one, and I was 13 years old, and I said, wow, Avallone, this guy's an Italian. That's the only guy that I ever saw on a book, and I had hundreds of books when I was a kid, and none of them were written by Italians, or any names that sounded Italian. I mean, even if the name was Puerto Rican or Spanish or something, I say, oh, that's kind of close to Italian, but you don't know, you know. But I'd say, like, you know, okay, this guy's an Italian. I says, wow, paisan. One guy made it, you know, and he was a hell of a guy. And I just want to, if you knew Mike, if you were one of the lucky ones to meet him and stuff, you would know that he was a special guy, and he was great with fans and people who read his books, and it was a nice time.
And he should be remembered.
And he should be remembered. And his books should be read. Some good stuff there too. So I just wanted to remember my friend. And thank you all for looking. And if you like this video, give us a thumbs up. Thank you.